Happy Friday. Oh, look, there's a dog. Oh, what a good dog. It's new book day. I'm excited, guys. Hey, it's Lily. Hey, it's Robakio. Hey, it's Farmhouse. New book day. No book day. Yeah, a little excited. How's everybody doing? It's Benedict. Benedict had a big day today. Oh, look at that. Clothes hanging in the background here. This place is a mess. What's this? What's going on here? Get rid of this. Yeah. Puppy! Treats for puppy. Sharkies, hello! It's new book day. It's new book day, Sharkies. Did the Sharkies get their copy? Yes, I am wearing socks today. I am not a hobbit. I am not hobbit-footed. You did? Oh, good. $5. So, you know what? It's going to be well worth it. It's going to earn itself every penny back. I don't know what that means. It's not going to earn itself back. Like, you're not going to get the $5 back from the book, most likely. But you will get at least $4.75 worth of enjoyment out of it. Blah, blah, blah. I'm quite tired. I only got like 4 hours of sleep last night. And then I got up bright and early and drove a friend to the airport. And then I took Farmos to physio. And then I took Benedict to the dog park, where there were many dogs. At one point, there were 8 other dogs plus him, I think, was the most. But other dogs came and went as well. So overall, more than 8 other dogs visited there. And they were all much larger than him, but he ran around with all of them and played with them and got real muddy, so we had to have a shower afterwards. Um, and yeah, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, he got very muddy. Um, what else? He doesn't like the shower, but he's getting better about it. You know, we brought him upstairs, and well, I say brought him, but we asked him to go upstairs, and he went up into the bathroom, and then we opened up the shower to get it ready, and he went in all by himself before we even like called him in. So he's, you know, he's patient about it, and he understands what's going to happen, and I think he just sort of wants to get it over with once we get started. Yeah, yeah. He's a good puppy. Look at that guy. Wow. What a good dog. What a good dog. You. You are a good dog. I'm kind of at that so tired I have energy point right now. Yeah. Yeah, he played with lots of other dogs. A few of them got into scraps with each other, and then when that happened, he starts like darting in and barking at them and trying to break them up and like getting between them. So he's a, I don't know, his herding dog instincts kick in, and he wants to like keep everybody safe, I guess. So yeah, that's been mostly my day. A few coffees in there to keep me going. Yeah. How was everybody else's day? Tomorrow, Robot Kyo and I and some other friends are all rallying out to a friend's mother's house to help with flood damage. We're gonna have to do some tearing up of the basement, it sounds like, and moving furniture and things like that. So tomorrow's gonna be a busy day, but luckily I think I'm gonna sleep well tonight. So hopefully I'll have lots of energy for that. Robot Kyo almost headed out there today. Yeah, yeah. It's a good thing that you got caught in time before you made that drive, because it's not a short drive, especially going there and back. Ah, yes, as Pharma says, hopefully it does not snow. Yeah, there is the chance of wet snow overnight tonight, apparently, according to the Weather BC, like, government weather site. So, we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, that's not too bad. And also, hopefully, tomorrow we can actually get through to Chilliwack through the traffic. The highways opened up apparently, but it's also said that it's going to be like slow going. So we'll see how that is on a Saturday, the first Saturday it's been open. I guess worst case scenario, we listen to some tunes for a while in the car. So Robakio, I don't know, load up a playlist if you want. So, other than Farmos and I, has anyone in here actually read any of the Belgariad before? Has anybody read Pawn of Prophecy? And if not, have you read anything else by David Eddings? Nope and Nope from the Sharkies? I think from David Eddings, I think I have only read the I guess technically 6 books of the Belgariad. I guess 5. I don't know. There's 5 books, and then there's sort of a like a an extra book, and then there's 5 books of the Malorian, which I've also read, and then I suppose okay. So there's 5 books of the Belgariad, 5 books of the Malorian, and then there's sort of 2 extra books that are sort of like character specific books. I don't want to go too much into that with it until we've been reading it a bit, maybe. Um, so I've read those 12 books, but I don't think I've read, like, they're all sort of covering the same characters and story. So I think that's all I've read. I don't think I've read anything outside of this world. But I could be mistaken. I'm just looking at the inside of the cover of this book, and I'm not seeing anything in there that I recognize that I have read. Farmhouse has only read the Belgariad, and Robakio has not and knows nothing of it or the author. Okay, well, I hope everyone enjoys it as much. I think everyone's going to. I think everyone's going to have a good time. I really like these books. Now, each book of the Belgariad has a prologue chapter that's usually a little bit more. It's an excerpt, usually from sort of like a history slash legend slash religious text of the world. Um, so the prologues are written in a different style. I'll start off by showing this map. I don't know how well we'll be able to see it on camera. Let's see if I can. It says in the corner there, the kingdoms of the west and the Angaraks. Meaning the kingdoms of the west is separate from the Angaraks. It doesn't seem to want to focus too much, which I'm not terribly surprised. But to be honest, I mean, this is something where, like, I like having this at the beginning of the book. And it might be worth, posting a link to an image of it online in case people care to look at it. I like having it there because it's, when they mention a new place, I can flip back to the beginning and look at the map and figure out where that place is. But this is one of those maps that's just scattered with, all sorts of little names of places and things. So it's hard to tell them all here. Oh, there, now it focused. So we got, the Sea of Winds up here, and Torak and Algaria, Mishrak Athol, the Sea of the East over here, Thol Murgos down here, the Moors of Murgos. I don't remember the Moors of Murgos actually coming up much in the story. I think that's Rakthol here. I'm just looking at the camera while I'm checking these. So we've got Tolnedra, we've got Arendia, Ulgoland. Is that... Let's see. Now that's the forest of Varju there. I'm not sure if Faldor's farm is actually marked on the map. But yeah, lots of locations, many of them, I don't know, some of them will come up, some may not. A stronghold over here. Is that Drasnia up at the top? So those are, yeah. And then lots of like little names that are probably not easy to make out. Let's see, I see Yarmarak. More Moors up at the top. Oh, and yeah, the Isle of the Winds is this island up here. Tol Vardu and Tol Horb down on the coast of the Great Western Sea there. I think that's just Arendish Forest in the north of Arendia. Ulgoland next to Arendia there in the mountains. I'm saying a lot of names and things right now, which nobody's going to understand yet, other than Farmhouse. One place that will be somewhat... that will definitely come up in this area here is the Vale of Aldor and the Tower. Anyways, why don't we just get into it, huh? I kind of want to get started. Yeah, we'll see. We can maybe flip back to it, or like I said, maybe I'll like, if somebody wants to, Farmhouse maybe, or somebody want to post a link to an image of it online. But we'll start with the prologue. Huh? Everybody ready? Sharkies, Robakio, Lily, Farmhouse, everybody? Who else is in chat? Benebik? Benebik's not in chat. Benebik's right here. I still see another TV viewer. My loyal viewer, another TV viewer. I really hope there is somebody behind that screen name. I would love it if they could come into the chat at some point, if there is. Because I always see that name in there, and I'm like, is that just a bot? I don't know. Does Twitch just have bots that just... Lily says ready, steady. Everybody's saying they're ready. Yay. Lily, do you know, are there just bots on Twitch? Because sometimes I see these names, but the people don't say anything, and I'm like, is there someone actually there? It's a monitoring bot. I'm being monitored? Ooh. I see Caxipso6 again. I've seen that name before. Lilituff. I don't know if I recognize that. Nintendo Switch XL. Alright. Some of these are familiar. I don't know if there's actually people there or not, but if there are, welcome, if there's anyone behind any of those names, and we're gonna start reading Pawn of Prophecy. First time reading this book. It's our third book. We have finished two others. We finished The Hobbit and we finished Guards. So, yay. Book number 3. Ben is sitting just here, just watching me like, story time? Hey, Ben? Story time? Alright. Let me stop moving the camera around and making you all queasy. Okay. Let me do my best historian voice, I guess, for this. Prologue. Drink of water. Okay. Prologue. Being a history of the War of the Gods and the acts of Belgarath the Sorcerer, adapted from the Book of Alorn. Alorn? I'm not sure. I think Alorn. When the world was new, the 7 gods dwelt in harmony, and the races of man were as one people. Belar, youngest of the gods, was beloved by the Alorns. I'm going to say Alorns, actually, I think. Alorns. He abode with them and cherished them, and they prospered in his care. The other gods also gathered peoples about them, and each god cherished his own people. But Belar's eldest brother, Aldur, was god over no people. He dwelt apart from men and gods, until the day that a vagrant child sought him out. Aldur accepted the child as his disciple, and called him Belgarath. Belgarath learned the secret of the will and the word. Both of those words, will and word, are capitalized. Learned the secret of the will and the word, and became a sorcerer. In the years that followed, others also sought out the solitary god. They joined in brotherhood to learn at the feet of Aldur, and time did not touch them. Now it happened that Aldur took up a stone in the shape of a globe, no larger than the heart of a child, and he turned the stone in his hand until it became a living soul. The power of the living jewel, which men called the Orb of Aldur, was very great, and Aldur worked wonders with it. Of all the gods, Torak was the most beautiful, and his people were the Angaraks. They burned sacrifices before him, calling him Lord of Lords, and Torak found the smell of sacrifice and the words of adoration sweet. The day came, however, when he heard of the Orb of Aldur, and from that moment he knew no peace. Finally, in a dissembling guise, he went to Aldur. "My brother," he said, "it is not fitting that thou shouldst absent thyself from our company and counsel. Put aside this jewel which hath seduced thy mind from our fellowship." Aldur looked into his brother's soul and rebuked him. "Why dost thou seek lordship and dominion, Torak? Is not Angarak enough for thee? Do not in thy pride seek to possess the orb, lest it slay thee." Great was Torak's shame at the words of Aldur, and he raised his hand and smote his brother. Taking the jewel, he fled. The other gods besought Torak to return the orb, but he would not. Then the races of man rose up and came against the hosts of Angarak and made war on them. The wars of the gods and of men raged across the land until, near the high places of Korim, Torak raised the orb and forced its will to join with his, to split the earth asunder. The mountains were cast down, and the sea came in. But Belar and Aldur joined their wills and set limits upon the sea. The races of man, however, were separated from one another, one from the others, and the gods also. Now, when Torak raised the living orb against the earth, it awoke, and began to glow with holy flame. The face of Torak was seared by the blue fire. In pain he cast down the mountains. In anguish he cracked open the earth. In agony he let in the sea. His left hand flared and burned to ashes. The flesh on the left side of his face melted like wax, and his left eye boiled in its socket. With a great cry, he cast himself into the sea to quench the burning, but his anguish was without end. When Torak rose from the water, his right side was still fair, but his left was burned and scarred hideously by the fire of the orb. In endless pain, he led his people away to the east, where they built a great city on the plains of Meloria, which they called Cthul Mishrak, City of Night, for Torak hid his maiming in darkness. The Angaraks raised an iron tower for their god, and placed the orb in an iron cask in the topmost chamber. Often Torak stood before the cask, then fled weeping, lest his yearning to look on the orb overpower him, and he perish utterly. The centuries rolled past in the lands of the Angarak, and they came to call their maimed god Kal Torak, both king and god. Belar had taken the Alorns to the north. Alorns. Alorns? Which sounds better, Alorns or Alorns? It's spelled A-L-O-R-N-S. Of all men, they were the most hardy and warlike, and Belar put eternal hatred for Angarak in their hearts. Getting more Alorns? Alorns? Okay. Sharky say, ooh, face wax melting like raiders. But only half the face. Alright, so the Alorns. And Belar put eternal hatred for Angarak in their hearts. With cruel swords and axes, they ranged the north, even to the fields of eternal ice, seeking a way to their ancient enemies. Thus it was until the time when Cherek Bareshoulders, greatest king of the Alorns, traveled to the Vale of Aldur to seek out Belgarath the sorcerer. "The way to the north is open," he said. "The signs and the auguries are propitious. Now is the time ripe for us to discover the way to the City of Night and regain the orb from One Eye." Poledra, wife of Belgarath, was great with child, and he was reluctant to leave her. But Cherek prevailed. They stole away one night to join Cherek's sons, Draz Bullneck, Algar Fleetfoot, and Riva Irongrip. Cruel winter gripped the Northland, and the moors glittered beneath the stars with frost and steel-gray ice. To seek out their way, Belgarath cast an enchantment and took the shape of a great wolf. On silent feet, he slunk through the snow-floored forests where the trees cracked and shattered in the sundering cold. Grim frost silvered the ruff and shoulders of the wolf, and ever after the hair and beard of Belgarath were silver. Through snow and mist they crossed into Meloria, and came at last to Cthul Mishrak. Finding a secret way into the city, Belgarath led them to the foot of the iron tower. Silently they climbed the rusted stairs, which had known no step for 20 centuries. Fearfully they passed through the chamber, where Torak tossed in pain-haunted slumber, his maimed face hidden by a steel mask. Stealthily they crept past the sleeping god in the smoldering darkness, and came at last to the chamber where lay the iron cask in which rested the living orb. Torak motioned for Belgarath to take the orb, but Belgarath refused. "I may not touch it," he said, "lest it destroy me. Once it welcomed the touch of man or god, but its will hardened when Torak raised it against its mother. It will not be so used again. It reads our souls. Only one without ill intent, who is pure enough to take it and convey it in peril of his life, with no thought of power or possession, may touch it now." "What man has no ill intent in the silence of his soul?" Torak asked. I completely forgot the voice I used for Torak like 2 minutes ago. But Riva Irongrip opened the cask and took up the orb. Its fire shone through his fingers, but he was not burned. "So be it, Torak," Belgarath said. "Your youngest son is pure. It shall be his doom, and the doom of all who follow him, to bear the orb and protect it." And Belgarath sighed, knowing the burden he had placed upon Riva. "Then his brothers and I will sustain him," Torak said, "for so long as this doom is upon him." Riva muffled the orb in his cloak and hid it beneath his tunic. They crept again through the chambers of the maimed god, down the rusted stairs, along the secret way to the gates of the city, and into the wasteland beyond. Soon after, Torak awoke, and went as always into the chamber of the orb. But the cask stood open, and the orb was gone. Horrible was the wrath of Kal Torak. Taking his great sword, he went down from the iron tower, and turned and smote it once, and the tower fell. To the Angarax he cried out in a voice of thunder, "Because you are become indolent and unwatchful, and have let a thief steal that for which I paid so dearly, I will break your city and drive you forth. Angarak shall wander the earth until Kthrag Yaska, the burning stone, is returned to me." Then he cast down the city of night in ruins, and drove the hosts of Angarak into the wilderness, and Cthul Mishrak was no more. 3 leagues off, Belgarath heard the wailing from the city, and knew that Torak had awakened. "Now he will come after us," he said, "and only the power of the orb can save us. When the hosts are upon us, Iron Grip, take the orb and hold it so they may see it." The hosts of Angarak came, with Torak himself in the forefront, but Riva held forth the orb so that the maimed god and his hosts might behold it. The orb knew its enemy. Its hatred flamed anew, and the sky became alight with its fury. Torak cried out and turned away. The front ranks of the Angarak hosts were consumed by fire, and the rest fled in terror. Thus, Belgarath and his companions escaped from Meloria, and passed again through the marches of the north, bearing the orb of Aldur once more into the kingdoms of the west. Now the gods, knowing all that had passed, held council, and Aldur advised them. "If we raise war again upon our brother Torak, our strife will destroy the world. Thus we must absent ourselves from the world, so that our brother may not find us. No longer in flesh, but in spirit only may we remain to guide and protect our people. For the world's sake it must be so. In the day that we war again, the world will be unmade. The gods wept that they must depart. But Chaldan, bull god of the Eddings, asked, "In our absence shall not Torak have dominion?" "Not so," Aldar replied. "So long as the orb remains with the line of Riva Irongrip, Torak shall not prevail." So it was that the gods departed, and only Torak remained. But the knowledge that the orb in the hand of Riva denied him dominion cankered his soul. Then Belgarath spoke with Cherek and his sons. "Here we must part, to guard the orb and to prepare against the coming of Torak. Let each turn aside as I have instructed, and make preparations." "We will, Belgarath," vowed Cherek Bareshoulders. "From this day, Aloria is no more, but the Alorns will deny dominion to Torak as long as one Alorn remains." Belgarath raised his face. "Hear me, Torak One-Eye," he cried. "The living orb is secure against thee, and thou shalt not prevail against it. In the day that thou comest against us, I shall raise war against thee. I will maintain watch upon thee by day and by night, and will abide against thy coming, even to the end of days." In the wastelands of Meloria, Kal Torak heard the voice of Belgarath, and smote about him in fury, for he knew that the living orb was forever beyond his reach. Then Cherek embraced his sons and turned away, to see them no more. Draz went north, and dwelt in the lands drained by River Mrin. He built a city at Boktor, and called his lands Drasnia. And he and his descendants stood athwart the northern marches and denied them to the enemy. Algar went south with his people, and found horses on the broad plains drained by Aldur River. The horses they tamed and learned to ride, and for the first time in the history of man, mounted warriors appeared. Their country they called Algaria, and they became nomads, following their herds. Cherek returned sadly to Val Alorn, and renamed his kingdom Cherek, for now he was alone and without sons. Grimly he built tall ships of war to patrol the seas and deny them to the enemy. Bardly? Upon the bearer of the orb, however, fell the burden of the longest journey. Taking his people, Riva went to the west coast of Sendaria. There he built ships, and he and his people crossed to the Isle of the Winds. They burned their ships and built a fortress and a walled city around it. The city they called Riva, and the fortress the Hall of the Rivan King. Then Belar, god of the Alorns, caused 2 iron stars to fall from the sky, and Riva took up the stars and forged a blade from one and a hilt from the other, setting the orb upon it as a pommel stone. So large was the sword that none but Riva could wield it. In the wasteland of Meloria, Kal Torak felt in his soul the forging of the sword, and he tasted fear for the first time. The sword was set against the black rock that stood at the back of Riva's throne, with the orb at its highest point, and the sword joined to the rock, so that none but Riva could remove it. The orb burned with cold fire when Riva sat upon the throne, and when he took down his sword and raised it, it became a great tongue of cold fire. The greatest wonder of all was the marking of Riva's heir. In each generation, one child in the line of Riva bore upon the palm of his right hand the mark of the orb. The child so marked was taken to the throne chamber, and his hand was placed upon the orb so that it might know him. With each infant touch, the orb waxed in brilliance, and the bond between the living orb and the line of Riva became stronger with each joining. After Belgarath had parted from his companions, he hastened to the Vale of Aldur. But there he found that Poledra, his wife, had borne twin daughters, and then she had died. In sorrow, he named the elder Polgara. Her hair was dark as the raven's wing. In the fashion of sorcerers, he stretched forth his hand to lay it upon her brow, and a single lock at her forehead turned frost white at his touch. Then he was troubled, for the white lock was the mark of the sorcerers, and Polgara was the first female child to be so marked. His second daughter, fair-skinned and golden-haired, was unmarked. He called her Beldaran, and he and her dark-haired sister loved her beyond all else, and contended with each other for her affection. Now, when Polgara and Beldaran had reached their 16th year, the spirit of Aldur came to Belgarath in a dream, saying, "My beloved disciple, I would join thy house with the house of the guardian of the orb. Choose, therefore, which of thy daughters thou wilt give to the Revan king to be his wife, and the mother of his line. For in that line lies the hope of the world, against which the dark power of Torak may not prevail." In the deep silence of his soul, Belgarath was tempted to choose Polgara. But, knowing the burden which lay upon the Revan king, he sent Beldaran instead, and wept when she was gone. Polgara wept also, long and bitterly, knowing that her sister must fade and die. In time, however, they comforted each other, and came at last to know each other. They joined their powers to keep watch over Torak, and some men say that they abide still, keeping their vigil through all the uncounted centuries. That's the end of the prologue, and then we have Part 1, Sendaria. Sharkies say, "The style of writing of this reminds me of the Old Testament, Mrs." And then Sharky says, "I think that's not an accident." Yeah, like I said, the prologue in each of these books is written a little differently, in generally in that kind of style. But it is just kind of a setup establishing, what's a little bit of the history of the world. So we have another map. This time it is a map specifically of Sendaria. Let's see if it'll... There we go. Just like that. Let's see. Can anyone spot Faldor's farm? I think it's on here. I think it's kind of right at the center there, actually. Yeah, I see it. Faldor's farm, kind of in between what looks like sort of two lakes, or maybe a lake and a bay. A little bit to the north center. Sharky say definitely some Ark of the Covenant and Line of Aaron vibes, which really does support the melting of the face wax. Farmo says the map looks like a... Oh yeah, I see it. I see the puppy. But yeah, Faldor's farm is up in this area. We've got actual Sendar is over here on the coast. And then up to the north is the Gulf of Cherik up here. And then Algaria, where the horses are, is over to the east. All right. Now that we're past the religious text portion of the book, let's get to the actual story, shall we? With Chapter 1. It's time for another drink of water, though. The first thing the boy Garion remembered was the kitchen at Faldor's farm. For all the rest of his life, he had a special warm feeling for kitchens and those peculiar sounds and smells that seemed somehow to combine into a bustling seriousness that had to do with love and food and comfort and security, and above all, home. No matter how high Geryon rose in life, he never forgot that all his memories began in that kitchen. The kitchen at Faldor's farm was a large, low-beamed room filled with ovens and kettles and great spits that turned slowly in cavern-like arched fireplaces. There were long, heavy work tables where bread was kneaded into loaves, and chickens were cut up, and carrots and celery were diced with quick, crisp, rocking movements of long, curved knives. When Geryon was very small, he played under those tables, and soon learned to keep his fingers and toes out from under the feet of the kitchen helpers who worked around them. And sometimes, in the late afternoon when he grew tired, he would lie in a corner and stare into one of the flickering fires that gleamed and reflected back from the 100 polished pots and knives and long-handled spoons that hung from pegs along the whitewashed walls, and, all bemused, he would drift off into sleep in perfect peace and harmony with all the world around him. In the center of the kitchen, at the center of the kitchen and everything that happened there, was Aunt Pol. She seemed somehow to be able to be everywhere at once. The finishing touch that plumped a goose in its roasting pan, or deftly shaped a rising loaf, or garnished a smoking ham fresh from the oven, were always hers. Though there were several others who worked in the kitchen, no loaf, stew, soup, roast, or vegetable ever went out of it that had not been touched at least once by Aunt Pol. She knew by smell, taste, or some higher instinct what each dish required, and she seasoned them all by pinch or trace or a negligent-seeming shake from earthenware spice-pots. It was as if there was a kind of magic about her, a knowledge and power beyond that of ordinary people. And yet, even at her busiest, she always knew precisely where Geryon was. In the very midst of crimping a pie crust or decorating a special cake or stitching up a freshly stuffed chicken, she could, without looking, reach out a leg and hook him back out from under the feet of others with heel or ankle. As he grew a bit older, it even became a game. Geryon would watch until she seemed far too busy to notice him, and then, laughing, he would run on his sturdy little legs toward a door, but she would always catch him. And he would laugh and throw his arms around her neck and kiss her, and then go back to watching for his next chance to run away again. He was quite convinced in those early years that his Aunt Pol was quite the most important and beautiful woman in the world. For one thing, she was taller than the other women on Faldor's farm, very nearly as tall as a man, and her face was always serious, even stern, except with him, of course. Her hair was long and very dark, almost black, all but one lock just above her left brow, which was white as new snow. At night, when she tucked him into the little bed close beside her own in their private room above the kitchen, he would reach out and touch that white lock. She would smile at him and touch his face with a soft hand. Then he would sleep, content in the knowledge that she was there, watching over him. Faldor's farm lay very nearly in the center of Sandaria, a misty kingdom bordered on the west by the Sea of the Winds, and on the east by the Gulf of Torak. Like all farmhouses in that particular time and place, Faldor's farmstead was not one building or two, but rather was a solidly constructed complex of sheds and barns and hen roosts and dovecotes, all facing inward upon a central yard with a stout gate at the front. Along the second-story gallery were the rooms, some spacious, some quite tiny, in which lived the farm hands who tilled and planted and weeded the extensive fields beyond the walls. Faldor himself lived in quarters in the square tower above the central dining hall, where his workers assembled 3 times a day, sometimes 4 during harvest time, to feast on the bounty of Aunt Pol's kitchen. Farmo says, that description of the kitchen feels like a warm blanket. Yeah, I like it a lot. All in all, it was quite a happy and harmonious place. Farmer Faldor was a good master. He was a tall, serious man with a long nose and an even longer jaw. Though he seldom laughed or even smiled, he was kindly to those who worked for him, and seemed more intent on maintaining them all in health and well-being than extracting the last possible ounce of sweat from them. In many ways, he was more like a father than a master to the 60-odd people, 60-odd people who lived on his freeholding. He ate with them, which was unusual since many farmers in the district sought to hold themselves aloof from their workers, and his presence at the head of the central table in the dining hall exerted a restraining influence on some of the younger ones who tended sometimes to be boisterous. Farmer Faldor was a devout man, and he invariably invoked with simple eloquence the blessing of the gods before each meal. The people of his farm, knowing this, filed with some decorum into the dining hall before each meal, and sat in the semblance at least of piety before attacking the heaping platters and bowls of food that Aunt Pol and her helpers had placed before them. Because of Faldor's good heart, and the magic of Aunt Pol's deft fingers, the farm was known throughout the district as the finest place to live and work for 20 leagues in any direction. Whole evenings were spent in the tavern in the nearby village of Upper Grault in minute descriptions of the near miraculous meals served regularly in Faldor's dining hall. Less fortunate men who worked at other farms were frequently seen, after several pots of ale, to weep openly at descriptions of one of Aunt Pol's roasted geese, and the fame of Faldor's farm spread wide throughout the district. The most important man on the farm, aside from Faldor, was Dernick the smith. As Geryon grew older and was allowed to move out from under Aunt Pol's watchful eye, he found his way inevitably to the smithy. All right, what's happening in chat? Sharky say, nice work if you can get it, and if you get it, won't you tell me how? The glowing iron that came from Dernick's forge had an almost hypnotic attraction for him. Dernick was an ordinary-looking man with plain brown hair and a plain face, ruddy from the heat of his forge. He was neither tall nor short, nor was he thin or stout. He was sober and quiet, and like most men who follow his trade, he was enormously strong. He wore a rough leather jerkin and an apron of the same material. Both were spotted with burns from the sparks which flew from his forge. He also wore tight-fitting hose and soft leather boots, as was the custom in that part of Sendaria. At first, Dernick's only words to Geryon were warnings to keep his fingers away from the forge and the glowing metal which came from it. In time, however, he and the boy became friends, and he spoke more frequently. Sharky say, sign on the farm. Warning, consumption of geese may cause weeping. No, descriptions of geese to those who have not consumed them. Maybe also the consumption of geese. I suppose that's fair. That's fair. Always finish what you send your hand to, he would advise. It's bad for the iron if you set it aside and then take it back to the fire more than is needful. Why is that? Geryon would ask. Dernick would shrug. It just is. Always do the very best job you can, he said on another occasion, as he put a last few finishing touches with a file on the metal parts of a wagon tongue he was repairing. But that piece goes underneath, Geryon said. No one will ever see it. But I know it's there, Dernick said, still smoothing the metal. If it isn't done as well as I can do it, I'll be ashamed every time I see this wagon go by, and I'll see the wagon every day. And so it went. Without even intending to, Dernick instructed the small boy in those solid Sendarian virtues of work, thrift, sobriety, good manners, and practicality which formed the backbone of the society. At first, Aunt Pol worried about Geryon's attraction to the smithy, with its obvious dangers. But after watching from her kitchen door for a while, she realized that Dernick was almost as watchful of Geryon's safety as she was herself, and she became less concerned. If the boy becomes pestersome, Goodman Dernick, send him away, she told the smith on one occasion when she had brought a large copper kettle to the smithy to be patched. Or tell me, and I'll keep him closer to the kitchen. He's no bother, Mistress Pol, Dernick said, smiling. He's a sensible boy, and knows enough to keep out of the way. You're too good-natured, friend Dernick, Aunt Pol said. The boy is full of questions. Answer one, and a dozen more pour out. That's the way of boys, Dernick said, carefully pouring bubbling metal into the small clay ring he'd placed around the tiny hole in the bottom of the kettle. I was questionsome myself when I was a boy. My father and old Barrel, the smith who taught me, were patient enough to answer what they could. I'd repay them poorly if I didn't have the same patience with Geryon. Geryon, who was sitting nearby, had held his breath during this conversation. He knew that one wrong word on either side would have him instantly banished from the smithy. As Aunt Pol walked back across the hard-packed dirt of the yard toward her kitchen with the new mended kettle, he noticed the way that Dernick watched her, and an idea began to form in his mind. It was a simple idea, and the beauty of it was that it provided something for everyone. Aunt Pol, he said that night, wincing as she washed one of his ears with a rough cloth. Yes, she said, turning her attention to his neck. Why don't you marry Dernick? She stopped washing. What? She asked. I think it would be an awfully good idea. Oh, do you? Her voice had a slight edge to it, and Geryon knew he was on dangerous ground. He likes you, he said defensively. And I suppose you've already discussed this with him? No, he said. I thought I'd talk to you about it first. At least that was a good idea. I can tell him about it tomorrow morning if you'd like. His head was turned around quite firmly by one ear. Aunt Pol, Geryon felt, found his ears far too convenient. Don't you so much as breathe one word of this nonsense to Dernick or anyone else, she said, her dark eyes burning into his with a fire he had never seen there before. It was only a thought, he said quickly. A very bad one. From now on, leave thinking to grown-ups. She was still holding his ear. Anything you say, he agreed hastily. Later that night, however, when they lay in their beds in the quiet darkness, he approached the problem obliquely. Aunt Pol? Yes? Since you don't want to marry Dernick, who do you want to marry? Geryon, she said. Yes? Close your mouth and go to sleep. I think I've got a right to know, he said in an injured tone. Geryon! All right, I'm going to sleep, but I don't think you're being very fair about all this. She drew in a deep breath. Very well, she said. I'm not thinking of getting married. I have never thought of getting married, and I seriously doubt that I'll ever think of getting married. I have far too many important things to attend to for any of that. Don't worry, Aunt Pol, he said, wanting to put her mind at ease. When I grow up, I'll marry you. She laughed then, a deep, rich laugh, and reached out to touch his face in the darkness. Oh no, my Geryon, she said. There's another wife in store for you. Who? He demanded. You'll find out, she said mysteriously. Now go to sleep. Aunt Pol? Yes. Where's my mother? It was a question he had been meaning to ask for quite some time. There was a long pause. Then Aunt Pol sighed. She died, she said quietly. Geryon felt a sudden wrenching surge of grief, an unbearable anguish. He began to cry. And then she was beside his bed. She knelt on the floor and put her arms around him. Finally, a long time later, after she had carried him to her own bed and held him close until his grief had run its course, Geryon asked brokenly, What was she like, my mother? She was fair-haired, Aunt Pol said, and very young and very beautiful. Her voice was gentle, and she was very happy. Did she love me? More than you can imagine. And then he cried again, but his crying was quieter now, more regretful than anguished. Aunt Pol held him closely until he cried himself to sleep. That part makes me sad. Sharky said, I wouldn't think about geese if I were you. You'd just get upset. Farmhouse enjoys how normal Geryon is. She says he's just curious and childlike and mischievous. He's not, like, special. Yeah, he's not weirdly intelligent or mature or anything like that, although his speech patterns, I feel like, are a little, I don't know, wordy maybe, but I guess he's just well educated on this farm. I don't know. But, yeah, he seems childlike, yeah. Oh, I missed Farmhouse saying that bothering Keese may cause weeping is what's normally said. Ah, you'd only get depressed. Yes, there you go. There were other children on Faldor's farm, as was only natural in a community of 60 or so. The older ones on the farm all worked, but there were 3 other children of about Geryon's age on the freeholding. These 3 became his playmates and his friends. The oldest boy was named Runderig. He was a year or 2 older than Geryon, and quite a bit taller. Ordinarily, since he was the eldest of the children, Runderig would have been their leader. But because he was an errand, his sense was a bit limited, and he cheerfully deferred to the younger ones. The kingdom of Sendaria, unlike other kingdoms, was inhabited by a broad variety of racial stocks. Chereks, Algars, Drasnians, Errands, even a substantial number of Tolnedrans had merged to form the elemental Sendar. Errands, of course, were very brave, but were also notoriously thick-witted. Geryon's second playmate was Dorun, a small, quick boy whose background was so mixed that he could only be called a Sendar. The most notable thing about Dorun was the fact that he was always running. He never walked if he could run. Like his feet, his mind seemed to tumble over itself, and his tongue as well. He talked continually and very fast, and he was always excited. The undisputed leader of the little foursome was the girl Zubret, a golden-haired charmer who invented their games, made up stories to tell them, and set them to stealing apples and plums from Faldor's orchard for her. She ruled them as a little queen, playing one against the other and inciting them into fights. She was quite heartless, and each of the three boys at times hated her, even while remaining helpless thralls to her tiniest whim. In the winter they slid on wide boards down the snowy hillside behind the farmhouse, and returned home, wet and snow-covered, with chapped hands and glowing cheeks, as evening's purple shadows crept across the snow. Or, after Dernick the smith had proclaimed the ice safe, they would slide endlessly across the frozen pond that lay glittering frostily in a little dale just to the east of the farm buildings along the road to Upper Galt. And, if the weather was too cold, or on toward spring when rains and warm winds had made the snow slushy and the pond unsafe, they would gather in the hay barn and leap by the hour from the loft into the soft hay beneath, filling their hair with chaff and their noses with dust that smelled of summer. In the spring, they caught pollywogs around the marshy edges of the pond and climbed trees to stare in wonder at the tiny blue eggs the birds had laid in twiggy nests in the high branches. I feel like it's been a long time since I've heard the word pollywog. It was Daroon, naturally, who fell from a tree and broke his arm one fine spring morning when Zubret urged him into the highest branches of a tree near the edge of the pond. Since Runderig stood helplessly gaping at his injured friend, and Zubret had run away almost before he hit the ground, it fell to Geryon to make certain necessary decisions. Gravely, he considered the situation for a few moments, his young face seriously intent beneath his shock of sandy hair. The arm was obviously broken, and Daroon, pale and frightened, bit his lip to keep from crying. A movement caught Geryon's eye, and he glanced up quickly. A man in a dark cloak sat astride a large black horse not far away, watching intently. When their eyes met, Geryon felt a momentary chill, and he knew that he had seen the man before, that indeed that dark figure had hovered on the edge of his vision for as long as he could remember, never speaking, but always watching. There was, in that silent scrutiny, a kind of cold animosity, curiously mingled with something that was almost, but not quite, fear. Then Daroon whimpered, and Geryon turned back. Carefully he bound the injured arm across the front of Daroon's body with his rope belt, and then he and Runderig helped the injured boy to his feet. "At least he could have helped us," Geryon said resentfully. "Who?" Runderig said, looking around. Geryon turned to point at the dark-cloaked man, but the rider was gone. "I didn't see anyone," Runderig said. "It hurts," Daroon said. "Don't worry," Geryon said. "Aunt Pol can fix it." And so she did. When the three appeared at the door of her kitchen, she took in the situation with a single glance. "Bring him over here," she told them, her voice not even excited. She set the pale and violently trembling boy on a stool near one of the ovens, and mixed a tea of several herbs taken from earthenware jars on a high shelf in the back of one of her pantries. "Drink this," she instructed Daroon, handing him a steaming mug. "Will it make my arm well?" Daroon asked, suspiciously eyeing the evil-smelling brew. "Just drink it," she ordered, laying out some splints and linen strips. "Ick! It tastes awful," Daroon said, making a face. "It's supposed to," she told him. "Drink it all." I don't think I want any more, he said. Very well, she said. She pushed back the splints and took down a long, very sharp knife from a hook on the wall. What are you going to do with that? He demanded shakily. Since you don't want to take the medicine, she said blandly, I guess it'll have to come off. Off? Daroon squeaked, his eyes bulging. Probably about right there, she said, thoughtfully touching his arm at the elbow with the point of the knife. Tears coming to his eyes, Daroon gulped down the rest of the liquid, and a few minutes later he was nodding, almost drowsing, on his stool. He screamed once, though, when Aunt Pol set the broken bone, but after the arm had been wrapped and splinted, he drowsed again. Aunt Pol spoke briefly with the boy's frightened mother, and then had Dernick carry him up to bed. You wouldn't really have cut off his arm, Garion said. Aunt Pol looked at him, her expression unchanging. Oh? She said, and he was no longer sure. I think I'd like to have a word with Mistress Zubret now, she said then. She ran away when Daroon fell out of the tree, Garion said. Find her. She's hiding, Garion protested. She always hides when something goes wrong. I wouldn't know where to look for her. Garion, Aunt Pol said, I didn't ask you if you knew where to look. I told you to find her and bring her to me. What if she won't come? Garion hedged. Garion! There was a note of awful finality in Aunt Pol's tone, and Garion fled. Pharma says, I'm going to marry my favorite adult lady. Very typical child. Sharky say, yup, can confirm. Reminds me a bit of an 80s or early 90s childhood. No video games. No TV. I didn't have anything to do with it, Zubret lied as soon as Garion led her to Aunt Pol in the kitchen. You, Aunt Pol said, pointing at a stool. Sit. Zubret sank onto the stool, her mouth open and her eyes wide. You, Aunt Pol said to Garion, pointing at the kitchen door. Out. Garion left hurriedly. 10 minutes later, a sobbing little girl stumbled out of the kitchen. Aunt Pol stood in the doorway looking after her with eyes as hard as ice. Did you thrash her? Garion asked hopefully. Aunt Pol withered him with a glance. Of course not, she said. You don't thrash girls. I would have, Garion said, disappointed. What did you do to her? Don't you have anything to do? Aunt Pol asked. No, Garion said. Not really. That, of course, was a mistake. Good, Aunt Pol said, finding one of his ears. It's time you started to earn your way. You'll find some dirty pots in the scullery. I'd like to have them scrubbed. I don't know why you're angry with me, Garion objected, squirming. It wasn't my fault Daroon went up the tree. The scullery, Garion, she said. Now. The rest of that spring and the early part of the summer were quiet. Daroon, of course, could not play until his arm mended, and Zubret had been so shaken by whatever it was that Aunt Pol had said to her that she avoided the two other boys. Garion was left with only Runderig to play with, and Runderig was not bright enough to be much fun. Because there was really nothing else to do, the boys often went into the fields to watch the hands work and listen to their talk. As it happened, during that particular summer, the men on Faldor's farm were talking about the Battle of Vaux-Mimbre, the most cataclysmic event in the history of the West. Geryon and Runderig listened, enthralled, as the men unfolded the story of how the hordes of Cal Torak had quite suddenly struck into the West some 500 years before. It had all begun in 4865, as men reckoned time in that part of the world, when vast multitudes of Murgos and Nadraks and Thulls had struck down across the mountains of the eastern escarpment into Drasnia, and behind them, in endless waves, had come the uncountable numbers of the Malorians. After Drasnia had been brutally crushed, the Angaraks had turned southward onto the vast grasslands of Algaria, and had laid siege to that enormous fortress called the Algarian Stronghold. The siege had lasted for 8 years, until finally, in disgust, Cal Torak had abandoned it. It was not until he turned his army westward into Ulgoland that the other kingdoms became aware that the Angarak invasion was directed not only at the Alorns, but against all of the West. In the summer of 4875, Cal Torak had come down upon the Arendish plain before the city of Vaux-Mimbre, and it was there that the combined armies of the West awaited him. The Sendars who participated in the battle were a part of the force under the leadership of Brand, the Revan warder. That force, consisting of Revans, Sendars, and Asturian Erens, assaulted the Angarak rear after the left had been engaged by Algars, Drasnians, and Ulgos, the right by Tolnedrans and Chereks, and the front by the legendary charge of the Mimbrate Erens. For hours the battle had raged, until, in the center of the field, Brand had met in a single combat with Cal Torak himself. Upon that duel had hinged the outcome of the battle. Although 20 generations had passed since that titanic encounter, it was still as fresh in the memory of the Sendarian farmers who worked on Faldor's farm as if it had happened only yesterday. Each blow was described, and each feint and parry. In the final moment, when it seemed that he must inevitably be overthrown, Brand had removed the covering from his shield, and Cal Torak, taken aback by some momentary confusion, had lowered his guard and had been instantly struck down. For Runderig, the description of the battle was enough to set his Arendish blood seething. Geryon, however, found that certain questions had been left unanswered by the stories. "Why was Brand's shield covered?" he asked Kralto, one of the older hands. Kralto shrugged. "It just was," he said. "Everyone I've ever talked with about it agrees on that." "Was it a magic shield?" Geryon persisted. "It may have been," Kralto said, "but I've never heard anyone say so. All I know is that when Brand uncovered his shield, Cal Torak dropped his own shield, and Brand stabbed his sword into Cal Torak's head, through the eye, or so I am told." Geryon shook his head stubbornly. "I don't understand," he said. "How could something like that have made Cal Torak afraid?" "I can't say," Kralto told him. "I've never heard anyone explain it." Despite his dissatisfaction with the story, Geryon quite quickly agreed to Runderig's rather simple plan to reenact the duel. After a day or so of posturing and banging at each other with sticks to simulate swords, Geryon decided that they needed some equipment to make the game more enjoyable. 2 kettles and 2 large pot lids mysteriously disappeared from Aunt Pol's kitchen, and Geryon and Runderig, now with helmets and shields, repaired to a quiet place to do war upon each other. It was all going quite splendidly, until Runderig, who was older, taller, and stronger, struck Geryon a resounding whack on the head with his wooden sword. The rim of the kettle cut into Geryon's eyebrow, and the blood began to flow. There was a sudden ringing in Geryon's ears, and a kind of boiling exaltation surged up in his veins as he rose to his feet from the ground. He never knew afterward quite what happened. He had only sketchy memories of shouting defiance at Kal Torak in words which sprang to his lips and which even he did not understand. Runderig's familiar and somewhat foolish face was no longer the face before him, but rather was replaced by something hideously maimed and ugly. In a fury, Geryon struck at that face again and again, with fire seething in his brain. And then it was over. Poor Runderig lay at his feet, beaten senseless by the enraged attack. Geryon was horrified at what he had done. But at the same time there was the fiery taste of victory in his mouth. Later, in the kitchen, where all injuries on the farm were routinely taken, Aunt Pol tended their wounds with only minimal comments about them. Runderig seemed not to be seriously hurt, though his face had begun to swell and turn purple in several places, and he had difficulty focusing his eyes at first. A few cold cloths on his head and one of Aunt Pol's potions quickly restored him. The cut on Geryon's brow, however, required a bit more attention. She had Dernick hold the boy down, and then she took needle and thread and sewed up the cut as calmly as she would have repaired a rip in a sleeve, all the while ignoring the howls from her patient. All in all, she seemed more concerned about the dented kettles and battered pot lids than about the war wounds of the two boys. When it was over, Geryon had a headache and was taken up to bed. Lily Fay asking when the book was written. Sharky say falling out of trees. And then comments, published in April 1982. So, yep, 80s. Yeah, that's fair. That's an interesting point. Farmo says maybe a small concussion. When it was over, Geryon had a headache and was taken up to bed. At least I beat Kal Torak, she told Aunt Pol somewhat drowsily. She looked at him sharply. Where did you hear about Torak? She demanded. It's Kal Torak, Aunt Pol, Geryon explained patiently. Answer me. The farmers were telling stories, old Kralto and the others, about Brand and Vomimbre and Kal Torak and all the rest. That's what Runderig and I were playing. I was Brand and he was Kal Torak. I didn't get to uncover my shield, though. Runderig hit me on the head before we got that far. I want you to listen to me, Geryon, Aunt Pol said. And I want you to listen carefully. You are never to speak the name of Torak again. It's Kal Torak, Aunt Pol, Geryon explained again. Not just Torak. Then she hit him, which she had never done before. The slap across his mouth surprised him more than it hurt, for she did not hit very hard. You will never speak the name of Torak again. Never, she said. This is important, Geryon. Your safety depends on it. I want your promise. You don't have to get so angry about it, he said in an injured tone. Promise. All right, I promise. It was only a game. A very foolish one, Aunt Pol said. You might have killed Runderig. What about me? Geryon protested. You were never in any danger, she told him. Now go to sleep. And as he dozed fitfully, his head light from his injury and the strange, bitter drink his aunt had given him. He seemed to hear her deep, rich voice saying, "Geryon, my Geryon, you're too young yet." And later, rising from deep sleep, as a fish rises towards the silvery surface of the water, he seemed to hear her call, "Father, I need you." Then he plunged again into a troubled sleep, haunted by a dark figure of a man on a black horse, who watched his every movement with a cold animosity, and something that hovered very near the edge of fear. And behind that dark figure he had always known to be there, but had never overtly acknowledged, even to Aunt Pol, the maimed and ugly face he had briefly seen or imagined in the fight with Runderig, loomed darkly, like the hideous fruit of an unspeakably evil tree. And that's the end of chapter 1. And it's 8:20. Sharky say memories of grad for Sharky, concussion and stitches. You were never in any danger. Yep, 80s childhood. All right, we read both the prologue and the first chapter. I have no idea how many times I have read these words. Farmos says my voice continues to be very soothing. Oh, thank you. My Pol voice is pretty good. That's the best I feel like I can ask for. I don't know, maybe I can improve on it. I'll have to think about some of the voices for this book. I should have thought about them ahead of time, because I know all of the characters. I'm going to have to think about what I'm going to do for some of them. Especially someone in the next chapter that's supposed to have a better voice than mine. But also Aunt Pol. Sharky's thought I heard Colin's voice in the old farmhand. It's a 1 in a million chance, but it might just work. Yeah, I can definitely hear the similarities myself. I don't think it was exactly the same. But, yeah. Farmos says a strand of... I saw that too, the strand of puppy hair that just went, woo. Yeah, I caught that while I was having a drink of water. So, I don't know. I find the prologue and the first chapter very interesting. They're drastically different in writing style from one another, but obviously that's intentional. And the first chapter, it's got very soothing moments, but I find that there's a few hints of mystery there. And definitely some foreshadowing dropped here and there. That, like, I don't know, violence that comes with childhood. It's a weird way of putting it, but, that, like, sort of innocent, like, nastiness, I guess. I feel like it's kind of portrayed there. What does everyone think so far? Farmos says, many books I feel rush into action, so it's nice to have this calm setup chapter. Yeah, this is definitely not a book that starts in media res. There's definitely, you're starting at the beginning, with Geryon's childhood. And even just, it's got one of those chapters. There's a bunch of books, like, I'll definitely a few of the books that I have on the stack here that we've talked about have these like memorable first paragraphs. You know, The Hobbit has like, you know, once you've read it a time or two, that introduction about the Hobbit hole at the beginning, just those beginning words I find are just so iconic. And not to compare this, like this isn't, I don't want to say this is on the same level as the Hobbit, but just the, the intro of the first thing the boy Garion remembered was the kitchen at Faldor's farm. For all the rest of his life, he had a special warm feeling, like that friendly introduction, that like, I don't know, wind in the willows kind of feel. There's definitely, and maybe it's just these are books that I've read time and time again. I feel like Magician Apprentice has a similarly, for me, like iconic introduction. And The Hobbit and this book. How does A Wizard of Earthsea begin? I'm sure once I see the first couple words, it's got that little bit of poetry. Wizard of Earthsea doesn't feel the same to me. The Wizard of Earthsea starts with a description of the Isle of Gaunt, and I feel like it doesn't have that same impact as just a first paragraph. Mr. Sharkey agrees with this kind of writing. He finds himself getting lost in a sea of... Oh, did I miss something? Yes, let's see. Lilyface said good character development. It's like getting to know them. Yeah. Sharky's missus is invested in Garion already, but the story... Oh. Mrs. says, I'm invested in Garion already, but the story is slowly warming on me. Pharma says, it's very like slowly sinking into a bath chapter. Mr. Sharkey agrees with this kind of writing. I find myself get lost in a sea of names at first, but then once the narrative starts to focus on particular characters, it becomes a comfortable foundation to continue on. Yeah, the prologues in these chapters are, I always find a bit, they're written like a religious text. They're not the most fun to read. Sometimes I'm tempted to skip them. And there's, it is like in that prologue, there is a slew of names, right? You've got the various gods. You've got Aldor and Belar and Cherik. Well, which one's the god of the Alorns? Is that... No, that's Belar. Even me. You've got Torak, of course. And then you've got the Alorns, Cherik and Draz Bolnek and Algar Fleetfoot and Riva Irongrip. And you've got Polgara and Poledra and Beldoran, and I'm sure there was at least one other god listed, and then you've got all the different types of people. You've got the Arens and the Alorns and the Ulgos and the Malorians and the Drasnians, and there's just this huge list of proper nouns that just... There's no way you're going to remember them, especially like the first time you read that prologue. It just feels like, so much happening here. But that said, it's okay if you forget all of that. I forgive you. I grant you permission to forget everything, except for maybe the rough outline of what happened in the prologue. And even if you forget that, it's okay. It's not vital that you remember every word of... What is this, a quote from the Book of Alorn? Yeah, adapted from the Book of Alorn. That's okay. But that said, I do feel like it is, we shouldn't skip it. It is a part of the story, and it sets the tone that this is a world with a history, and it gives you a bit of that, the War of the Gods, and, some important bits of information about the Orb of Aldor and how it got taken away to the Isle of Winds by Riva, to the Hall of the Revan King, and just some sort of world history before you get to the present, or the past. I don't know. I guess the present. It's told as the present, and this child Garion and his Aunt Pol and whatever. So I feel like there is a big tonal switch between the prologue and the first chapter, but really the when you get to chapter one, that's when you really feel how the story is going to sound and feel. Like you get a proper feel for it. I I worry that some people might start with the prologue and get put off and put the book down just from that and be like, oh, this is too dry and dull. Pharma says this is definitely a book where there are a lot of names, but it's pretty good about giving each important one enough focus to differentiate them. At least usually the important ones. Yeah, I was noticing comparing this book to both Guards and The Hobbit. I mean, The Hobbit's pretty descriptive, but the description of Dernick the Smith, for an example, like he got a solid paragraph describing him, right? Like you get a nice description of his forge, the sparks and the glowing iron, and then you get, Dernick was an ordinary man with plain brown hair and a plain face, and it's like, okay, he's ordinary, but then it continues, ruddy from the heat of the forge, neither tall nor short, nor was he thin or stout, sober. He was sober and quiet, like, and enormously strong. And it describes his clothes even. He wore a rough leather jerkin and an apron of the same material. Both were spotted with burns. Like, you get quite a thorough description of Dernick and of Aunt Pol. And I appreciate that. I feel like Guards, as an example, I know I have a mental image of the characters, but they're kind of described almost like by metaphor sometimes, right? Especially like Nobby as an example. Um, and Lily was asking me what color Errol the dragon was, and I could not remember. I remember his scales being white with frost at one point, but it may have been mentioned, but I've got my picture in my head, but I don't remember the actual descriptive text for a lot of the characters and thing. I don't know, I guess. Because that's mixed, right? You get a lot of descriptions of like Lady Ramkin, but a lot of times that's more of like her presence. Um, like I don't remember an actual physical description of Vimes so much, even though he's like the central main character. You get described what he's wearing occasionally. But let's see. Farmos said, I would just let the basic prologue story. I would just let the basic prologue story was over your, and the rest of the details aren't immensely vital to remember. It's like setting the tone. And then nice farm life. And food. Sharky say so many good stories have some really memorable descriptions of food. That's like the primary thing I remember about reading the Redwall books as a child, which apparently was very intentional by the author. I believe he was originally a janitor, Brian Jacques, in a school where there were some blind children. And so he wanted to be certain to be very descriptive in describing certain things so that when it was read to blind children, they would have a nice description of things. But I always remember the feasts in the Redwall books and being like, I don't like eating mushrooms, but he made mushrooms sound delicious. Farmo says, yes, good books and good movies, like food in Ghibli movies. Chucky say, yes, on that note, we'll now eat a muffin by the missus made for all butter day. I was definitely getting a bit hungry during this chapter. Like, oh, I need to eat something. Farmhouse, that was supposed to be wash over you. Just let the basic prologue story wash over you, and the rest of the details aren't immensely vital to remember. It's like setting the tone. Yeah. Which is, I know I said all of this after you had written your bit. I just wasn't reading that far, but yeah, that's a lot of what I said as well. But I'm pretty sure you had typed that out first. And yes, happy all butter day to the Sharkies and to everybody else. I guess we kind of celebrated all butter day in advance with the Figgins. Belated. It was yesterday. Did I not say belated? I meant to. Did I say something else? Lily Fay is almost afraid to ask, what is All Butter Day? I should probably let the Sharkies explain, but it's the Sharkies' holiday that originated from a sticker that says all butter that got stuck onto a calendar. My hair is getting quite long. When it's wet, it's down between my shoulder blades. Oh boy. A little bit longer today. I mean, a little bit longer, just I feel like because it's the first stream with a new book. Robot Kyo says, I feel like if Christmas has Boxing Day, then All Butter Day needs some kind of post-day name too. Rama says we can tie my hair back pretty easily. Sharky say, All Butter Day is a holiday we made up in our family. December 2nd is All Butter Day, a day for baking. Yeah, if I pull my hair back, I mean, I think it goes back pretty. It takes a little bit of effort and some extra strength hair ties, but I tie it back when I go to Kung Fu mostly. And then when I let it go, it just goes boing. 3, 2, 1. Boing. Lily says, like Pie Day, but all baking, not just pie. Sharkies already have All Butter's Eve when Mr. usually preps pie crust, but day after sounds good too. Lily asking if I like my hair long. I don't know. I like it long, I like it short. There's pros and cons to each. The main con of it having it long is that when I have a shower, because I can only get a comb through it when I've got, like, my hair's wet and it's got conditioner in it. And it takes quite a long time to, like, properly wash my hair. That's the biggest problem with having it long. Sharky say, yes, and it's not necessary to use only butter. Spread the word. Sharky say, spread the word, Mr. does a facepalm. Oh, is that new? Is that a new pun? Or was that unintentional? I assumed that was an intended pun. Oh boy. So yeah, we did it. We made it through the prologue in chapter 1. I was getting like excited yesterday and today to read this book. I just like remembered like, oh yeah, we're gonna be reading Pawn of Prophecy tomorrow. I get to share this book with other people. I'm excited. And there are parts in this first chapter that are like, when Garion asks about his mother, it makes me want to tear up. Like, I had to kind of, I don't know if you guys noticed me, like, take a drink of water. That was me trying to calm myself down a little bit. And, like, when he gets angry and starts attacking Runderig, I don't know. There's just parts in this book that, and it's probably just because I've read it so many times that it's, like, it's probably a large part nostalgia or something like that. But yeah. So I'm very happy to be sharing this with everybody. And I hope that everybody enjoys it when we get through. We made it to page 25. We finished page 24 out of 262 pages. Lily says, woot woot. Okay, well, I hope everybody has a good weekend, as good as possible. Some of us are going to be going to deal with flooding damage tomorrow. Hopefully that will be, at least it'll be nice to see people, even if it's not for the best circumstances. Sharky say, a lot of media give a lot of time to teen angst, but not as much to childhood angst. I'm here for it. Lily says, give a hug for me, be safe in the snow. I hope it doesn't snow. It's not snowing yet, is it? I can't see any snow from here. at the windows. Not yet. Yeah. The forecast said maybe wet snow, so I'm hoping that even if it does snow, it'll have melted by the time I leave in the morning, because I'm not leaving until around like 9 or quarter after 9, something like that. All right. Well, have a good weekend, everybody. I'll see you next Wednesday when we get to chapter 2. I'm looking forward to it already. I just want to keep reading. I'm like, yeah, it's 8:40. We can go longer, right? Let's just keep going. Raid, yes. I don't have anybody as per usual, so if you have someone you'd like to suggest, I will happily post a raid for anyone that wants to continue onwards. Sassy 974 cheese. Okay. I'll post a raid link to that, and that's how we'll end tonight. Sassy is playing It Takes Two. Okay. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. See you next Wednesday. I hope you are all looking forward to the next chapter, but it is not going to be as much as I am looking forward to the next chapter. I promise. Good night. Bye-bye. Wah.